all into it. We all have been swept up in the Netflix Drive to Survive Arrivis F1 wave. Yeah, so we are held in complete contempt by real fans. But hey, I'm having a good time. This will probably be the only race of the year I get up at this kind of time for. But it was just because it was the first one, I was all in, and then the race was insane. Are you ready to rock?
Shall we go?
Shall we?
Yeah. Hi, Cara.
Okay. Hi, Vicky.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and excited to talk to you about somebody who is so interesting and quite a mysterious character in their way.
Oh my gosh, I'm so ready. Well, welcome everyone to She Changed History. The lovely Cara is with us today, and she's got a fabulous story to tell us. Off you go. Let's hit it.
Okay, so in the coming weeks, as we're recording this, the world will be observing Transgender Day of Visibility, which falls on March the 31st each year. So that felt like a really good time to talk about a figure from British history called Dr. Barry, whose gender presentation was something private, obviously, but also became a topic of public speculation and was a key to their career because of the time in which they lived. I wanted to start with a sort of a broad disclaimer and say this is a nuanced story and a nuanced topic. And I always want to, and will try to here, stick to the facts, not make assumptions. I've been as careful as I could be about the language. So I'll be using they instead of he or she, because there is ambiguity about how Barry thought of their own gender identity. And some of the historical sources use wording that would now be considered inappropriate or outmoded. And I use those words advisedly and in context. But
sure,
I'm open to feedback. I'm no expert. So at me if you wanna. I'm absolutely
we're
open
here to
to
learn.
it. Okay, exactly.
And equally, if I'm responding and I don't respond in the current political way, just call me out. I'm totally happy to be called out.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We kind of need the listeners to chime in on their areas of expertise where we're doing our level best, but we're open. We're open to learn, aren't we?
We're learning. Let's go.
Yep. Okay, so the sources for today then are the National Archives, a biography by a writer called Rachel Holmes called Scanty Particulars, The Life of Dr. James Barry, the London Guides, you know, the fellas with the umbrella who take you
seriously?
around. They have blogs about museums and galleries of London, so there's a piece there. The University of Edinburgh alumni website, another biography, this one called Dr. James Barry, A Woman Ahead of Her Time, by Michael Dupreez and Jeremy Dronfield, and the Wellcome Collections, copies of documents from the Public Records Office. So today we have the story of Dr. James Barry, and it might not sound like an obvious choice for a pod called She Changed History, but stick with me, please. So to start us off from the National Archives, I've got some facts of Dr. Barry's life, which, super concise. Born in 1795 in Cork, Ireland, Barry became a leading doctor with a glittering medical career who did much to raise standards of medical care in and outside of the army. Barry chose to exclusively live and identify as a man, having been assigned female at birth. So, yeah, Barry at birth was assigned female and named Margaret Ann Bulkley, born into poverty with a couple of siblings, a father who struggled financially. In common with a lot of the stories that we talk about, the family was broken apart, and Margaret's mother brought them to England when they were 15 years old.
Okay.
So brace yourself. We've got a little bit of Empress Matilda style recycling and reuse of names here. Yeah, it's not quite Empress Matilda levels.
Jeffrey and Jeffrey Jr.
It's just a little bit like, huh? But then you go, oh, I see. Okay, so Margaret, as was Margaret, had an uncle called James Barry. So after they emigrated, Margaret's mother reached out to Uncle James and he couldn't or wouldn't help them financially. But after he died, they inherited. They also were in contact with his circle of friends who were sort of, he was an artist and a professor. They were artists, they were liberals, they were politically active. So Margaret and Margaret's mother decided to use the money they inherited from Uncle James as a nest egg to help pay for Margaret to pursue medical training at the University of Edinburgh. But the hitch was women did not gain the right to be admitted to universities in Britain at all until 1868, as you know from past episodes. They didn't gain the legal right to be trained as doctors until 1876. So at this point, it's 1808, and Margaret attending med school is not straightforward.
They're like way ahead of their time. And also, how cool with that is that your mum wants to invest in you.
Yes.
How nice is that?
Yes, and is willing to kind of pull some strings and make some plans. So the alumni pages on the University of Edinburgh website says that when Uncle James died, a plan was hatched that Barry, would study medicine in Edinburgh disguised as a man. And then once their family friend, General Francisco de Miranda, was trying at the time to liberate and take charge of Venezuela. And then Margaret would go to Venezuela and practice medicine there as a woman. That was the plan.
Got it.
Yeah, like what's Venezuela got to do with anything? Barry, Margaret, as was, obviously identified, I can't do what I want to do in my own country. I'm willing to bend the rules and do what it takes to do it. But like Lise Mettner, like some of the other women you talked about, there comes a point where you have to make this decision to emigrate. If the laws of the land don't support you, you want to do what you want to do, you go where you can do it. So that's where we're at. Obviously very determined.
Yeah, and also very like in line with today, like weirdly, because of
going after
the way,
it.
Yeah, and the way politics is going, people are considering moving to a country that supports what they want to do and where how they want to live. And, you know, it just shows that we have the same dilemmas hundreds of years later. Slightly different context, but the core decision that some people are making is the same, right?
It is. It's disturbing to think that we're still
that's
there.
A good word.
So Barry, med school. They've got this clever plan.
Yeah.
And
they're sneaky.
Well, they have to work for it. So Barry applies to the med school and has some work experience, having enlisted apparently in the army from about age 15 or so.
Okay.
Again, an army that only accepted men. So quite how that worked, I don't know at this point. I think it evidently must have been, as you say, as a man, but then goes along to the university to apply. And because Barry was of small stature and had no facial hair and a high voice, the university senate moved to block the application and block them taking their entrance exams because they simply did not appear old enough. And if you've got the document that my notes, there's a portrait there. And looking at the portrait, right, you can see the point. This person looks to be 11 years old. You would have some questions if they turned up and said, "Hi, I'm here to apply to uni." It's also,
I want to be a doctor.
I feel like, can you read the tape?
Would I give you a scalpel? No.
Possibly no. There's also a chance that portrait, I'm no artist, but between you and me, I'm saying it's perhaps not technically the best portrait that's ever been done. So who knows? Maybe it's a bit unfair. But anyway, ultimately, whatever misgivings they had, they did let Barry sit the entrance exams and they took their place at the university. So.
And in Edinburgh, which is a beautiful university and very prestige. Yes.
And has a rich history in the field of medicine, which I'm sure we'll dig into more at other points. So Barry is now living at uni and doing their studies, and you think about your own uni experience and how do you disguise the physical fact of your body if you are presenting yourself as something other than what your physical appearance would suggest? So in a modern way, you think, how do you even do that? But social protocols around sort of personal privacy and demureness, is that the right word? Like discretion in the 1800s were pretty broad. So it wouldn't have been alarming for someone to simply not show their body to, you wouldn't be in a changing room having a chat, putting on your deodorant. Frankly, even now, I would sooner break a cyanide tooth than have a chat with someone that I know in a changing room. No, but Barry just kind of kept themselves to themselves and wore kind of heavy clothing that supported
thick, I imagine.
Yeah, thick weaves and bound any more feminine aspects of their physiology so that they did not show to be a female body.
A bit like Gentleman Jack, a little bit. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
That is such a good, and if you look at the gorgeous, gorgeous fashion that's in Gentleman Jack, you can see, I mean, they played up the sexy, obviously, because it's a fiction and it's kind of about that. But you can see how the tailoring of that day could be turned to your advantage if you were trying to sort of just give yourself a straight up and down, more masculine presenting line.
More of that tailoring today, please, I think.
Don't mind comfy. That at all. Yeah. Don't mind that at all. I'm slightly disturbed by the prospect of the smell of wet tweed. So yeah, Barry's there. They're doing their program. And University of Edinburgh, as you say, illustrious, respected university. But get this, the program to become a surgeon back at that time looked a bit like this. Okay, so Barry qualified as an MD in 1812.
What's an MD?
A medical doctor. And that took 1 year, one teeny tiny year. A medical doctor. They had to write a thesis. And interestingly, the thesis Barry wrote was on a condition called femoral hernia. And apparently it's a condition more commonly presenting in women. So that's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
It's cool. Then Barry went on to Guy's and St. Thomas's, another institution we would still recognize today as being in the forefront. That was to study as a surgeon, and they studied under some really well-respected and renowned surgeons at the time, and then had to pass an exam at the Royal College of Surgeons, and that happened in 1813. So
2
2 years,
guys,
done and dusted.
Yeah,
it's horrifying.
No patient stuff in these 2 years, is it? I imagine it's just lots of theory and lots of looking at things in jars.
I think there's also that really gnarly surgical historical thing of, you can see it in like books like The Mad Woman's Ball, where basically they rock up and watch the surgeons do a surgery, and that's your training. Like, I've sat in an auditorium about 35 feet away. I didn't vomit or faint. Right? I'm just watching it because there's like 800 students all watching it. Great, we're qualified. You know what I mean?
Jesus Christ.
So to put everyone's mind at ease, I read that and went, holy hell, that's alarming. Nowadays, if you want to be a surgeon in Britain, you typically take between 14 and 16 years. People listening, please do not cancel any procedures you might have booked. It's fine.
We do love the NHS.
We all had to start somewhere, and that's where they were. It was a pioneering field. They were doing what they were doing. 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, I may have mentioned it was 2 years, Barry became the first person to graduate as a medical doctor in Britain who was a woman.
Okay, under the radar. They didn't know that they'd done
without the university knowing so, without perhaps even them wishing to be known that way. So there is this question mark. But the first openly female candidate, as you well know, was 50 years later in 1865, Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who you have done another
her.
pod about, and
what number
an
pod is
excellent
she?
one.
Let me get what number. 17.
Okay, so
Really
Elizabeth Garrett
recent.
Anderson, pod number 17, and another one who exploited a loophole, as you cover, to go through her training.
Yeah, Simon did a cracking job, didn't he? Okay, cool. So this was slightly before.
Slightly before and under the radar, whereas she was openly going for it.
And fighting hard, yeah.
Yeah. So Barry now has done those years of training, is qualified and ready to work. But sadly for them and the plan that they had hatched with Mom and with the family friends, possibly also sadly for the people of Venezuela, I don't know, the revolution there did not go General Miranda's way. So all the plans of what happened after qualification had to be abandoned. And Barry, at that point, has the choice. They leave the career that they've just trained for and love, or they continue to live as a man to practice in Britain.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because they're probably loving it as well, is my guess. Is that if you're studying and learning and your mum's invested in you, you want to thrive in that environment, don't you?
That's it. They're not doing the easy thing. They're doing the hard thing. And you don't do the hard thing unless you have a really strong motivation. So we
and
also
standing and values and your compass and all that.
And skill, absolutely. And as an extra layer to that, because we don't know how Barry thought about their own gender, this might not have been a tricky decision at all. This might have been quite straightforward. But what we can say is Barry went all in, because immediately after achieving that qualification as a surgeon, they not only carried on living and working as a man, they also immediately joined the all-male British Army. So, like putting a tin lid on it, that is what I am doing. And again, that question, how do you get away with disguising your physical gender if you're enlisting? And again, it's the time frame that we're working within, because people entering the military as an officer, you're sort of grandfathered in because you're a certain social class, you've attained a certain level of education, so the door is open to you. You're not subject to the same scrutiny, I suppose.
Also, I'm thinking is, what's the alternative for Barry? So absolutely she went all hard, all in. But what was you just go back?
Yeah, without knowing the detail of it, what springs to mind is, I suppose, the limitations of the gender. What useful application can I get? How do I help people in that way?
Yeah.
Midwifery, maybe? Being kind of a village, like a quote unquote healer, somebody who could do. That's not satisfying to someone who has trained at the absolute cutting edge of surgery in a time when surgery was in its infancy. And that was such a powerful thing to be able to do to help people. I have to say, there's also historical records, a letter that Barry, while still identified as Margaret, wrote to their brother saying he, I guess, had decided to leave the army, the brother, to become a lawyer, no slouch. And Margaret kind of wrote a letter seemingly scolding him and saying, well, if I was a boy, I'd be a soldier. I can't believe you're, throwing this away. So perhaps,
that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think it was like a B-list choice for them. I think they were into it. So
got you.
Yeah, that started the career progression. I'm going to try to kind of go through quickly because, like a lot of the people we talk about, it was hit the ground running and go, go, go after it. Sweet. So Barry was deployed to Cape Town, and in short order, they ended up attending to medical matters for the kind of the big cheeses, the high-ranking officers, and gaining favor using that time-honored combo of impressing people with being very capable, but also very charismatic. And that won them a position whilst still at a relatively low military ranking, to be the colonial medical inspector in Cape Town.
Sweet.
And that sort of set the ball rolling. And
Okay.
to kind of give you the greatest hits in a condensed way, this is an excerpt from the London Tourist Guide website. So we've got the top 4 here. Barry was one of the first British surgeons in medical history, they say the first, but that's disputed, to perform a successful cesarean section, saving both the lives of the mother and the baby.
That's fascinating.
Right? They were ultimately Inspector General of military hospitals, but we'll come back to that. The first person born a woman to become a member of the Royal College of Surgeons, 98 years before they officially admitted women.
Yep.
You know, our episode 17 notwithstanding. And apparently, just to name drop, old Nappy B, Napoleon Bonaparte, summoned Dr. Barry to treat the son of his private secretary because the rumors were so great. Oh, I said 4. There's actually 5. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
This is the most important one of all, I think. Barry worked consistently throughout their career to campaign against poor sanitation and overcrowding in prisons and army barracks at every single place they were deployed to, which was May. They were out there working for the great and the good, for people who didn't have a voice for themselves.
Oh, well, they sound fabulous.
Right? And would you like a little bit of pub trivia?
I mean, you know I love a pub quiz. Let's go.
Right? So, okay, here you go. The little baby that was born of the C-section that Barry performed the baby was named after Barry. The baby's name was John Barry Munsig. And then that family carried on the tradition of naming the boy children John Barry. And ultimately, one of the descendants ended up being the Prime Minister of South Africa. So from 1924 to 1939, John Barry, not Munsig, sorry, John Barry Munich Herzog. There you go. So little baby carried on throughout the generations, bringing that name forward, which ultimately, originally belonged to mean Uncle John,
James,
who wouldn't help James, who wouldn't help them. So back on track here, sorry. Any of those achievements in a career, I think, would have been remarkable. But
I'll take it, yeah.
All of them, whilst carrying the stress, presumably, of like, might someone find out my gender and then I'm going to be disbarred, defrocked, whatever happens to doctors, surgeons. You get kicked out, you're done. So an absolute overachiever, but not necessarily a nice person to know. So I'll go back here to the University of Edinburgh, who say Barry was considered a bad-tempered, squeaky-voiced eccentric, often teased by colleagues for their voice. Mean, really mean. And it said that Barry challenged tormentors to duels and shot one man dead through the lung. And their note, teasing died down after this particular incident. Well, I bet it did.
I mean, not surprised.
Nobody likes a bully, but again, that's kind of overachieving in the avenging yourself stakes. Shooting someone through the lung, it's such an intense.
But were duels quite common back then? It probably a duel today is probably much more.
I tell you, my only frame of reference is Hamilton.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
They happened in 100% of cases.
Most
all disputes end
no
in
one
duel.
shoots. Yeah.
Yep.
That's what they say.
But no, Barry apparently actually did the thing. Barry even had beef with Florence Nightingale. So there's a quote from her basically saying, what a horrid little man. Florence Nightingale.
What was the beef?
I don't know the details of it. It seems like Barry was on a horse on a battlefield. They met. He was rude and dismissive. She was not having it. I wasn't there. I'm not going to weigh in.
Internalized misogyny a little bit.
Well, I wonder that too.
Yeah.
Or perhaps a desire to keep a woman at arm's length who might spot things Yeah, like
Yeah.
you might see through something these guys aren't going to. I better, you know, take a strong move to put you in your place and not get off my horse, like
Florence
just
Nightingale,
rude,
man.
right?
Jesus, pick a side.
Synonymous with caregiving. So yeah, Barry is probably more than a little bit spicy. Um, but those qualities of not shying away from a fight, of being so self-assured and centered in their own beliefs, are probably what allowed Barry to challenge the status quo. They had the stomach for an argument. They had the stomach to stand up to the politicians and the officials who were setting medical policy and to say, this is not good enough. People are becoming sick. So
Yeah.
that pattern of pushing back and making improvements to benefit the troops, the prisoners, the people who did not have a voice, it just came up again and again.
It's a tussle, isn't it?
It really is. And these are people who are very also confident in the rightness of their own opinions. And someone coming with medical fact and meeting fire with fire is what made change happen. So Barry's out there, South Africa, Mauritius, Jamaica, St. Helena, the West Indies.
Travel bunny.
Traveling, posting, military posting, ruffling feathers all the way, but had some friends in high places because of the sheer efficacy of the work. So
sounds like they know how to play the game.
yeah,
Like it sounds very political, nuanced, and very like they know how to navigate this world. And that, to be honest, in itself is a very strong skill set.
it really
it?
is. And
Yeah.
meeting bluff and bluster with just as much brr, I do know, actually. Thank you, Mr. Man. And that won over. As long as you deliver, you can sort of out-bully a bully sometimes, but nobody can argue with fact. If you have soldiers dying of dysentery and then they're not dying of dysentery because of moves that you said were necessary, that's that, isn't it?
Yeah,
like you can't out-bully a fact. So they worked their way through in this way and then were promoted in 1840 to become the principal medical officer in the army. Whew. And let's not stop there. Off to Corfu to become the Deputy Inspector General of Hospitals, on to Canada, which was a British Commonwealth territory. Is that the right term? So off to Canada in 1857 to become the Inspector General of Hospitals, which is a very high ranking.
High.
And again, extending that program of care and fact-based service to include prisoners, people with leprosy, as well as the soldiers and their families. We're not just being transactional about it. We're actually caring about the well-being of people. So I have a picture, an actual photograph of Barry with, it says a long-serving butler called John. And then there's a little dog called Psyche. Barry was apparently immensely fond of animals. So there you have Barry and John in London gentleman mode. And that is ultimately what Barry was to become. In 1859, Barry was forcibly retired from the army. He didn't retire, they retired him because he was old by their standards and in poor health. And Barry fought hard to not be retired, but ultimately lost.
That sounds consistent to his character.
Yes, you don't tell me. I tell you when I'm ready to retire. That is absolutely consistent with his character. Definitely. That being said, the army may have had a point because it was just 6 years later that Barry did die, and not a good death, sadly. Died of dysentery, which is miserable.
What's that?
It's a gastrointestinal disease. It is, I think it's a waterborne illness. It turns up in areas of poor sanitation.
Okay.
I'm not saying London at the time was that, but this is a person who's traveled a lot. Dysentery, and I think on the death certificate, the doctor put it down to, he used a really interesting turn of phrase, which was something like unconventional dietary choices. And Barry is known to have been a vegetarian, which I suppose in that day where you ate like a lamb chop for breakfast, it probably did seem peculiar to eat only vegetables. But one way or the other, poor old Barry is now dead. And this is the point where the identity that they have worked hard to preserve and keep private,
oh, of course,
became a matter of public speculation. So the facts are as follows. A person, a woman, went to the media to say, Dr. Barry, the medical inspector from the British Army, as was physically female. And there is a kind of narrative behind that the person came in to wash their body, to prepare them for the funeral procedures. At any rate, there's some speculation about she, the woman who disclosed this, might have been motivated by money or perhaps had a grudge.
Yeah.
But one way or the other, she went to the media and said, Dr. Barry was physically female. There's even more
already
to it,
unreliable sources.
Yeah, it's sketchy, but the historical documents do support the facts of Barry having a female presentation. Whatever her reasons, why she chose to make that public and the ethics of making that public, I'm not even going to touch because,
we don't know.
It just seems, it seems too shrouded in mystery. Doesn't feel like a great thing to do, obviously. But whatever the reasons, it caused a media sensation. The colleagues who had worked with Barry over the years were contacted, and there are all these articles, and you've kind of got people expressing surprise. You've got people saying absolutely cannot be true, and people saying, I knew it all along. I don't know what Florence Nightingale would have made of it if she was still around at the time. But ultimately, the comment that I'll kind of pull in at this point was from someone whose position was Registrar General. They went to the medical examiner who issued Barry's death certificate, on which it was declared that Barry was male. And the Registrar General asked that person, Mr. McKinnon, what's the deal? And Mr. McKinnon's comment was, it was none of my business whether Dr. Barry was a male or a female. That, as I thought, he might likely be neither. Whether Dr. Barry was male, female, or hermaphrodite, again, an outmoded term, but it's set in context, I do not know, nor had I any purpose in making that discovery, as I could positively swear to the identity of the body as being that of the person who I had been acquainted with as Inspector General of Hospitals for a period of 8 or 9 years.
Yes, Mr. McKinnon.
Right?
Loving this guy.
So we cannot know what was in Mr. McKinnon's mind as he wrote those words. But to my thinking, what I take from it is this. Barry was the person McKinnon knew. And whatever was going on in their pants was of no relevance to anyone other than Barry themselves. It had no bearing on their professional capabilities. They were just Dr. Barry, as skilled a practitioner as you could hope to meet, ferocious ally, fearsome enemy, which it's very a she changed history take, right? That's
we
what
need more of that thinking now.
We do. The gender limitations on almost every single job you could think to do, with some very specific exceptions, gender limitations on work are inappropriate and they diminish all of us. They take people out of the workforce who would be so capable.
Oh my God. And would be so productive and would progress humanity more than we could ever realize.
So all of that around the professional capability piece having been said, I will now, in my last thoughts on the topics, mention this, that The University of Edinburgh puts it this way: to give Barry the full respect they're due and to refer to them by the correct gender, it would be useful to know if they considered themselves to be a man or if they identified as a woman all along after decades of pretending. And, they may have considered themselves non-binary, and we probably will never know because the treasure troves of source material about this have been pretty thoroughly examined.
Yeah, there's been a lot of time, I imagine.
There has, and
but
such an interesting character. People have really sought to kind of dive in, and now with a LGBTQ plus lens, a modern lens on this issue, there are people who want to know this for an entirely new set of social reasons. So I get the historical interest, but whatever the case may be about how Barry saw themselves, the life's work speaks for itself. And the uncertainty really only serves to show, to my mind, that gender non-conforming people are and always have been a productive part of our society. So that is where I leave it. Dr. Barry.
Ta-da!
Ta-da!
I did feel like really light after the Dr. McKinnon quote. I was like, yes, like that's articulated better than I ever could, that the work's more important than the person.
I acknowledge that I have chosen a specific set of lines from a longer letter, but if you go onto the Wellcome collection website, you can see a photocopy of the letter. I truly believe that it was a matter of logic, and well, don't be absurd. That doesn't even matter. And yes, Mr. McKinnon, love it.
Oh, Cara, thank you so much.
Yeah,
you did that. Yeah, really good narrative. Thank you.
Excellent. This is a nice one. I have to say, my great friend Phil is a huge medical history buff, and the reason I know about this person is that Phil loaned me one of the biographies that I cited in the sources, Scanty Particulars. It's really been interesting to revisit this person, because when Phil loaned me that book, it was probably 10 years ago, say.
Okay.
And the book had been knocking about for more than a decade. And already the difference in how we view a life and a person's right to their own gender identity, for our purposes, the facts of a woman's ability to do certain jobs or so on those are just plain facts. But the kind of more murky things about how a person might feel about their own identity have really started, the thinking has moved on since I last read about this character, and that's been fascinating to dive into.
Hey, thank you, Phil. Shout out to Phil there.
He's a dude. He's a good egg.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much,
Vicky. Thanks very much.
Well, we hope you enjoyed it too. Thank you for listening. If you did enjoy that, please share. Please share our podcast. Like, rate, subscribe. We're on Instagram. We're now on YouTube properly. I've understood how to work YouTube now. Yeah. Well done.
Nice one.
But I don't think Instagram likes us anymore, I think.
Oh, the old algorithm's gone on the turn.
It hates us a little bit at the minute. So anything you can do to share would be very, very valuable, listeners. Thank you very much. And we'll be back next week.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks listeners.
Bye.
Bye.